I'm Monica Nogueira here with SAE International Headquarters in Pennsylvania. I'm the the editorial director of the Ed Research Reports. And this is a series we created not only for the SAE Ed Research Reports, but also to bring together experts to talk about the unsettled topics, the things that are not yet resolved in the mobility industry. Joining me today, we're going to have very good experts and very good people to work with. So the first one is Ann Lee Jeffs that talks with us from New Jersey, correct, Ann? Right. So she is with the MIT Professional Education. Then we have SAE's own Frank Menchaca. Hi, Frank, who is here in headquarters. And he is the president of SAE's Sustainable Mobility Solutions. And we also have Joanna Safi, who talks with us from Bogota, Colombia, and who is the principal of a consulting firm called MSBHAVE, which I love the name. Absolutely love the name. Yeah. So the three of them, these speakers, have actually developed a new ED report. It has been published, the one that you see on the screen right now, Textile Circularity and the Sustainability Model of the New Mobility. And we're going to talk about what they actually saw during the interviewing process, the reviewing process, and so on and so forth. We also have with us Sisi Martucci. You cannot see her, but she's right here, and she is our marketing manager and the person who makes this mobility frontier happen, operations wise. So the first thing that I would like to ask you, the three of you, is basically tell us a little bit about you, each one of you, and how this team kind of gelled together and eventually produce this EDGE report. Whoever wants to start.
I'll go first. I'm Ann Lee Jeffs. I work with MIT Professional Education Program to help executives to achieve their CSO certificate within their program. Also, I just recently launched Sustainability Women in the World, NGO, to really activate the superpowers of women CSO to create that tide that lifts all of the sustainability leaders in the world. I'm an engineer by training. I worked for multinational companies like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Colgate-Palmolive, Honeywell, as well as a startup. I really got into the challenges and opportunities of textile circularity when I worked for a startup called Metal. They're in the next gen bio-based material space, and I was challenged in terms of introducing that next gen material that Metal makes. And as a MIT professional education CSO coordinator, I got in touch with Frank Menchaca when he made an amazing presentation when he completed the CSO program. I was so impressed that I gave him a call to talk about the challenges that I'm facing at Metal and presentation that he gave about textile circularity. And we connected immediately, and he suggested that, hey, why don't you maybe write a report? It's only 25 pages, 30 pages long.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I'm glutton for punishment all my life working in sustainability, and I signed up. In addition to my CSO role at Metal. And then I went to a conference. I met Joanna Safi, and Joanna was saying, I'm interested in MIT Professional Education CSO certificate program. Should I sign up? And I said, well, do you want a certificate on your resume, or do you really want to experience impact project? Because impact project, depending on your team, it's kind of mixed bag, because everybody who takes that program are so busy. Depending on the team that you end up with, you may not get all the things that you want to get out of it. And I said, well, by the way, I do have a couple projects, impact projects that you can think about. So I gave her a pitch, a couple projects, including what Frank suggested, research project on textile circularity and why mobility sector is ideally positioned to really activate that. And Joanna said yes. So the rest is a history, and that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay. Joanna, so how did you feel being brought into the fold of this project? And then we'll ask Frank to close the loop.
Great. So I'm Joanna Safi. First of all, I come from a marketing background. I've been in the marketing network from creative companies and media agencies, and having a background in political science and biology, I always wanted to be in sustainability. So I decided to, after about 15 to 18 years of working as a CMO in different corporations, I wanted to do real impact for sustainability. So I went to this conference, I went to Anne's panel, I looked her up in LinkedIn, I was really amazed by her. And I talked to her, and what Anne tells you, everything is absolutely true. And I was so grateful and so amazed that she could actually bring me into one of her projects. I was like, wow, is this really happening? I was amazed. I was really nervous. I had no idea what I was getting into. And mixing textiles with mobility, I was, oh my God, this is going to be huge. I have a history of, connecting biology and political science, so I was very thrilled to start connecting other things. And first, very grateful. Second, nervous. And third, now I'm very happy I went into it with all of you, and having this research project is really something that can start a lot of different things for what we're going to talk about next, which is the future of sustainability working intersectorally.
Absolutely.
So that's my part of the story.
So Frank, please tell us a little bit more about the SAE Sustainable Mobility Solutions and how this eventually brought everybody together.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks to Anne and Joanna. I'm really happy to be here. So I've been with SAE for almost 10 years, running really all the commercial side of the organization, but I started to incubate our work in sustainability a couple of years ago. SAE, of course, has been involved in the development of electric vehicles for a long time, really since the very beginning. One area that we were not really involved in was the infrastructure surrounding things like the electric vehicles. So the charging infrastructure, the circular economy associated with parts like batteries, and the workforce development. So I really kind of incubated that work in these broader areas of sustainability for SAE and for some of our affiliates. And that led me to pick up a degree in sustainability from MIT. And as Anne mentioned, we were assigned a project. Everybody has to do an impact project. And we happened to choose fashion. And I know everyone, says, wow, to look at Frank, I immediately think fashion. But I actually didn't really know anything about fashion, but I knew about sustainability and circular economy. It turned out to be a really fascinating area. Fashion is undergoing, by virtue of the digital product passport for textiles, fashion is undergoing kind of a total rethink in Europe. With this need to create reusability, resellability, refurbishment. And so that's a lot of what we do on the engineering side. And so when Anne contacted me to talk about the work we were doing in fashion and textiles, it seemed like a really natural fit to talk about those things within the context of the transportation industry, because right now the transportation industry is undergoing this tremendous sort of process change. As we think about engineering, we have to start thinking about reuse and extended producer responsibility, and how to reuse things like battery minerals, which are mined, which is a very labor intensive and environmentally impactful thing. And so it seemed like a really natural fit to think about collectively how we can look to the transportation industry to help advance textile circularity. So that's kind of what brought us all together.
Very good, thank you. So, Anne, how would you define textile circularity?
So textile circularity, defining it today, it's limited in scope, because it's basically use and make and waste. Textile circularity, in terms of future state, it's about the things that are happening in the mobility sector in terms of designing for repair and recycle and repurpose in mind, and having the infrastructure to collect and reuse it back as a feedstock into making new textiles, and also taking into consideration use of the renewable feedstock, whether it's cellulose basic like viscose and such. So it would have both, obviously virgin, but also textile made from the waste, as well as from the renewable feedstock. The textile industry is very challenged because of the amount of the overproduction that it focuses on, because of the revenue. It's quarterly profit, revenue has to be generated, and also the textile in terms of fashion, if you just take one t-shirt, right, cotton may be made in India, and then the cotton is taken to Australia to make into a cotton itself, the textile, and then it may go back to India again to be sewed, and then it's shipped all over the world. So to activate that textile circularity in fashion is tremendously challenging, and I think the Europe region in the world is setting the precedence in terms of they're regulating it. They're regulating
Right.
it. So as a global company, whether you're located in Australia or India or US, you have to start with the toughest regulation. So that's going to really activate that momentum, and it's happening, but it's not happening fast enough. And that's why I think mobility sector is a great place to really show the world how to activate textile circularity, because of its inherent infrastructure. While that's the case, I think mobility sector still the focus is on metals. Battery is starting, but plastic and textile are still behind the behind the curve, or not even here today. There are companies like Rivian who focuses on circularity, and their goal is to make all of their materials inputs come from the circular sources, and they're in search for circular materials, and it's really, really challenging. Plastic water bottles and milk jugs are fed into making all kinds of stuff like t-shirts to the car parts, and we don't have enough water bottles, and we shouldn't be using water bottles first of all, right? So I think activating that cross-sectorial plastic and textile circularity using mobility sector infrastructure is a really, really unique place to start, and we're trying to working with Frank to trying to figure out how that could be possible.
Right. So, Joanna, I remember in one of our conversations when you guys interviewed a series of companies, but and once you told me, now what I've been hearing is inspiring. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you tell me why it's inspiring? Because coming from Anne, we're not there yet, but the mobility sector, in the mobility sector, what do we see today in terms of the use of textiles? So what kinds of textiles and what they're used for, besides obviously the carpeting and seats? What have you heard?
So, Monica, it is inspiring. The mobility sector is always looking for new ways to make their materials circular. Obviously, there are a lot of parts in the mobility sectors that are more advanced than others. They are obviously more based in metals or batteries. And when we started talking more profoundly to all of the people that we interviewed from fashion, textile sectors, mobility, from cars, airlines, etc., we were surprised of what we found. First, we talked to especially Rivian. Rivian is a EV brand that is very sustainable at its core. It has it in their DNA from beginning to end, which is absolutely amazing and inspiring what they're doing. And we started with Anne to research on their LCAs, which it's one of the only brands that are actually disclosing LCAs. And we started to look at it. We saw that most of the materials on textiles that they're using is obviously nylon, and they're petrochemical based. It's resin based. It's nylon, and it's part of a feedstock that can actually start making car parts. It's not only about textile and carpets and the lining that it's all around, but it's actually how are they making their parts, right? So when you see that textile 60% are plastic, you start thinking, why don't we start putting textiles as feedstock for their bumpers? Why don't we start making it part of their wheels? Why don't we start making it part of other parts that are not the typical textiles that you first think about, or carpets and everything?
Right.
So what we also saw was sustainable aviation fuel, which is, I think, amazing. Also, sustainable aviation fuel is something that the airline industry has to accelerate in order to get to their goals. But there are obviously a lot of regulations, limitations, not only on the production, the consumption, the mixtures, and there are a lot also of limitations on the feedstock, especially from the European Union legislation that limits a lot of organic feedstocks because of obviously limitations. And when we started to get inside and research, we found that textiles can be a feedstock for SAF. Not only to increase production, but also what we found that it also could be feedstock for biohydrogen, that it's the next level aviation fuel for sustainability.
These are all great things. Frank, from your perspective, you're out there with the industry every day. What do you see?
So there is, it's a very big set of changes that the transportation industry is undergoing. The shift from fossil fuel-based propulsion to electric and renewable propulsion is probably the biggest shift that the transportation industry has undergone since its founding. And it is a shift that ripples through nearly everything, from materials that are used, to engineering practice, to how business people think about their business, how we educate the next generation of engineers, and how we retrain working engineers. So it's a huge shift. I think the great challenge is that it's a very fragmented set of efforts. You know, you have Joanna mentioned Rivian, very forward-thinking company like Rivian that really doesn't have kind of a legacy, you know, roster of vehicles that they have to worry about, so they can focus on innovation. And then you have really large, you know, traditional OEMs that are moving their production from fossil fuel based to electric. So everyone is kind of at a different trajectory. What I see as kind of a common denominator is a real desire for frameworks and eventually standards. Now, as a standards organization, SAE, you know, participates in all of that. What I think is really exciting, and I think what this EDGE report and other EDGE reports have helped to do, is to look upstream from standardization, where things have not been settled, where many doing things in many different ways, and to bring a kind of structure the way Joanna and Anne really brought to thinking about textiles for the transportation industry. I think it's a tremendous help because you know, these manufacturers need to think about these things early on in their production cycle, and to really begin to kind of shift their mindset onto a kind of reuse, refurbish, recycle,
and use it again.
And use it again 100%. You know, I'll just give you a quick anecdote. I was out at Consumer Electronics a couple of years ago. There was a major Detroit automaker that was announcing a whole fleet of new electric vehicles. And the CEO stood on stage at Consumer Electronics, which is in Las Vegas, a very big show, and said, so there are no leather seats in any of the cars that you're going to see. And these were luxury vehicles. And I thought, that's really kind of that's an interesting kind of sea change, because, you know, leather interior was always a big part of a luxury vehicle. And here we have the CEO of a major company saying, we've used, you know, plant-based and reusable materials on the insides of these cars. And I thought, that's kind of where we need to go. And so, you know, I think this paper and some of the efforts that we're doing on the standardization side, not just SAE, but the rest of the industry, I think is really going to help to kind of gather up that fragmented effort.
Absolutely. Thank you. Is there a way to tell if one car or brand is more recyclable than others? Is there a way to find out? So up to you guys. Who wants to answer?
Well, I think I'll take a swing at it. There are some manufacturers that are really foregrounding their recycling and reuse, you know, in their marketing, and really kind of pushing this forward. And, you know, they are making, I think Joanna mentioned, you know, Rivian, there are several others, as Volvo, for example. They're really making the supporting information about their efforts, you know, public. They're making their life cycle assessments available. They're, you know, they're really pushing forward, you know, the decisions that they're making. So there's not a good, you know, kind of guide to all of this, but what I see is more and more manufacturers really kind of foregrounding their efforts and willingly, you know, kind of turn over the documentation that's behind it.
And make it public, right?
Make it public, for sure.
Right. Very good.
Yeah.
So we have here another question. What is your response to people who say your idea is great, but why don't I just use AI to do it? I don't know how we would fit this into this conversation, but again, because AI may be soon to burst, we don't know. But while it is in the bubble, is there anything that you guys see in this ecosystem of information or findings where AI could be useful?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at that. From my standpoint, addressing global warming and climate change requires all of the tools we have, every tool that we can think of. AI has to be part of that. The ability to use AI to condense and summarize complex amounts of data, particularly if one is doing something like a life cycle assessment. You have to draw data from many, many different sources. That data may be reported inconsistently. It may not have a standard way of being benchmarked. And natural language processing and so on are great tools to help to deal with unstructured and somewhat complicated, inconsistent sets of data. So I don't know that AI is going to be able to completely design a completely reused interior for a vehicle, but it can certainly help a designer to make good decisions about the carbon footprint of the materials that they're using and the overall environmental impact.
Very good. Joanna, you said you want to complement what Frank was talking about?
Yes, I think AI is it's going to be the best tool possible throughout this life cycle, throughout this whole supply chain. Not only, from the design, which is one of the most important phases of all of the value chain, when you start to see how you're going to design the product to be as recyclable as possible, to be able to change just a piece of material to another without getting all the material out of the car or just destroying the car all completely. It's going to help throughout the value chain, for the data, for traceability, for everything. And I also think that consumer demand will also help all the industry be able to start disclosing all the information possible to make a better purchase decision, not only on the battery side or the typical material part, but also on the whole process throughout the value chain, not to shift impact, but to actually reduce impact in every part. So I do think AI is going to be a huge tool to help the people in the process reduce and make it traceable and transparent.
Yeah, very good. Anne, do you have any additional thoughts?
I think I agree with both what Frank and Joanna elaborated. I think AI still is not there yet, although I think AI is used by all the companies and there's a lot of vendors out there to use that power to bring about traceability, transparency, and also I think with the product passport that will cover automotive as well as textiles and also other products. There's going to be need for having transparency over the entire the supply chain, which is the toughest part. So when you look at any product footprint, 95% or plus is coming from supply chain, and also by because consumer use. Just looking at the Rivian LCA, 40% of the footprint in terms of carbon is coming from consumer use, right? Which is going to decrease as we continue to move the grid, our energy system to renewable, right? So that's 40%. 40% is coming from battery and metals, right? And I think more and more so metals already 70 to 80% recycled. Battery is just getting started. So once we go completely, renewable energy, the grid, the EU, right, by 2035, they're going to only sell electric vehicles. So the influence of the plastic and textiles, which represent that part of that 20%, so 40% consumer use, 40% battery and metals, and 20% other, right? The plastics and other materials. So as we move to renewable energy, the consumer use is going to go down. As we do more battery cycle, that influence, the other 40% will go down. So the textiles and plastics, and textiles, as Joanna said, it's basically nylon and polyester. They're plastic.
Yes.
Right. So that's
synthetics. Yes.
And there's going to be a pressure to reduce that, and there's going to be limitation as to how much water bottles. This clear plastic is very rare commodity. So one of the things that we were talking about with the healthcare sector, Healthcare Plastic Recycling Council with Rivian, was looking at polypropylene clear plastic sources, potential use case in the EV sector. So I think AI is gonna provide a catalyst to assess in terms of how do we get an idea of clear polypropylene plastic source from healthcare that could potentially be a source for to be used, for the interior for cars.
Right. Yeah. So talking about this as a business opportunity, right? Here we say synthetics today, which make up more than 60% of all textiles, consume around 1% of total oil production and account for 16% of plastic consumption worldwide. How is this a big opportunity which could help resolve a huge environmental problem? How do you put these two together? Frank, do you have something to say about this?
Yeah, as part of our MIT project, we really looked at the impact of plastics. So anything that has plastic essentially, stays in the environment for, decades and decades and decades. Any kind of textile that has plastic, typically ends up in a landfill. And that landfill just keeps mounting up with more plastic. It doesn't biodegrade, and in really the worst cases, it ends up flowing into rivers and streams, which puts it among wildlife. And we've all seen images of flotillas of plastic bottles and marine life caught up in plastics. So I think it is a great opportunity to be looking at new kinds of materials, like plant-based materials, mycelium, for example, which is the connective materials of mushrooms, has been shown to be very, very effective, strong, material used in lots of different applications. I think if we can continue to advance our understanding of materials, not only in terms of things like their strength and their durability, but how they can be reused rather than remanufactured, then you start to pick up this, sort of snowball effect. I'll use the analogy of batteries. The less mining we have to do has an enormous effect upstream from the battery in the electric vehicle. It means that mines don't have to be built, water doesn't have to be displaced to create lithium. There's all sorts of knock-on effects that come from that reuse of material. When you have an electric vehicle, after 10 years of use, the average battery life is about 80%. And so that battery can be used as a storage device. It can be used in many different ways. And so if we can think broadly about how we use materials and how we engineer the use of materials in our vehicle designs, we can have tremendous impact on the presence of plastics, the presence of materials that don't biodegrade, and that at the end of life can be refurbished or reused and put back into the economy without having to source new material. And you don't have all of that, manufacturing and sourcing and transportation that goes into actually making something.
We do have a question from the audience. Any comments on commercial vehicles and trucks?
Yeah, so commercial vehicles I'm really glad whoever asked that question asked it. When we think about electric vehicles, we think about passenger cars because that's just sort of what gets all the attention. But the commercial vehicle industry, both on-road and off-road, has been doing really good work in the area of sustainability. You have trucking companies that are exploring, the electrification of trucking. You have things like platooning technologies where one truck rides in the draft of another and saves, as much as 10% of fuel, and that alone is significant. And then you have on the off-road side the electrification of mining. Mining equipment that is increasingly automated, which saves people having to go into mines, but also electrified. And, a company like Caterpillar, foregrounding its remanufacturing, where they are taking back their vehicles, their off-road vehicles, remanufacturing them and selling them again to a very welcoming market. So I think it's a great question. Commercial vehicles, trucks, both on-road and off-road, really, it's to me an underappreciated area that's doing good work in society.
I would agree. And Joanna, you guys, since we moved from light duty to heavy duty, now let's talk a little bit about the aerospace sector. You guys had the chance to talk with, I forget the name of that gentleman. He was very good. That was is it the president of the Aerospace Waste Management Association? Yes.
Gregoire.
Yeah.
Gregoire.
Gregoire. Yes. Sorry about that, Gregoire. I apologize. What has he told you that is going on? Because we're seeing things that are super cool. One is that, for instance, one airline not only recycles, but makes bags out of their recycled textiles. So these things, besides SAF, which we already discussed, but what else is going on?
There's a lot of things that are happening inside the aerospace industry in sustainability. They are mainly focusing on SAF, which is like their main goal as a sustainability objective for the next coming years. So what we've been told is that there are a lot of efforts going on in this, but there's still a lot of lack of regulations and standardization throughout the world, which makes this a lot of, it is a huge opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge. Every country or every region has a different regulation, but we are lacking standards. And what we've seen is that we need to accelerate this. I know Gregoire is making a huge effort to unite this, to make this, it's not only about the waste of the airline inside the airline, it's also on the operation side, on the airport side. There is a huge value change that impacts the aeronautical sector, which makes it very challenging. So this is what's happening. It's in this process of, getting to standards and getting to regulations that are, standard regulated worldwide. Airlines are taking this into their hands and they're trying to make a lot of sustainable initiatives, such as what we've seen with recycling this and making it a handbag, or getting their uniforms and making it part of the airline's carpet. And it's very separate initiatives, which are siloed initiatives from airline to airline, but they're still getting to that part of standardization and regulation, which is it's challenging, and they are primarily focused on SAF also. But there are also a lot of inspiring things that airlines have done with SAF. We can talk about especially airlines in Japan, which are actually getting to the forefront of experimenting with locally created and produced SAF. For example, Japan Airlines has already experimented with clothes, cotton clothes. They gathered an initiative, but they got consumers' clothes in, and they created SAF, and they flew the plane. It's super standardized.
So
and
it works, right?
It works. Exactly. And on your past question is, we have ore. It is actually, and this is something that we have discussed with Anne and Frank, textile waste is actually next generation ore, because it's going to be a huge feedstock for a lot of different applications throughout different industries, especially because it's 92 million tons of waste produced yearly, which only 1% actually gets recycled.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. And any thoughts on that? We're almost at time.
I think current state is we're still activating circularity in a who and one-off way, and I think SAE is really super ideally positioned to create not only collaboration across the OEMs and suppliers, but engage with, let's say, a healthcare sector, where all of their plastic, whether from hospitals or from their manufacturing sites, a lot of that gets incinerated, especially in hospitals. Consumer products, the packaging are all mostly going to landfill. So I think there's a unique opportunity to leverage AI, leverage the CSOs. Now the sustainability is now regulated. It's transitioned from a nice to have to a voluntary to mandatory. The CSO, Chief Sustainability Officers, are now they're placed in public and private organization, and they're sitting at C-suite and on boards. And I think there's a unique opportunity to really activate the CSO across the sectors, and start with mobility with healthcare. Where healthcare is also there is some infrastructure, right? The hospitals, they collect their plastic waste and they send it to the landfill incineration, and start the conversation and show that this can be done, so that best practices can be written. And also there's a need for more policy and regulation, and also incentives. The last year, I think Ford received $8.3 billion, billions of dollars in setting up 3 battery recycling sites in US. Why not for plastic? With the plastic treaty about to finalize end of this year in Seoul, Korea, I think the production is going to be curtailed, and there's going to be there's going to be push for the recycling of plastics, as well as getting the toxics out of some of the polymers. So I think the mobility sector is uniquely positioned to really take those low hanging fruits, like the polypropylene, clear plastic waste from healthcare, to have that become a feedstock for the mobility sector, and mobility sector really showing the world that cross-sectorial collaboration and circularity is possible.
Yeah, and it can solve problems. Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely, Monica.
Thank you all so much.